When it happened, I could faintly hear a voice calling to me. As I searched for who it was, I suddenly saw my dear sister under attack.
This means the champion's successors will not return in Tears of the Kingdom.
To support Princess Zelda.
Well, after some consideration, it's time I released a follow-up video on how terribly wrong one of my theories were. The theory that the new sages, Sidon, Yunobu, Riju, and Teba... Hey guys, it's Skylink from the future, quick edit here. So when I said Teba, I meant to say Tulin. This whole Tulin-Teba time travel thing does make things kind of interesting, but that could grow to its own video. Anyway, let's get back to this one. Sidon, Yunobu, Riju, and Teba would not return in Tears of the Kingdom, even though they actually did. I'll be presenting a new idea that can correct this theory. I'm gonna recap first, so see timestamps if you want to skip the recap. So first of all, my argument on why the successors, now being called sages, not returning in Tears of the Kingdom was clearly incorrect. They all did return, and their role grew even further, becoming sages and future peacekeepers to dedicate their lives to Princess Zelda and all of Hyrule. But interestingly, in Tears of the Kingdom, they did not recall or state anything about traveling to the past, as we saw them do in the Zelda spin-off, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. So, I originally argued that the successors would not return in Tears of the Kingdom because in Age of Calamity, Teriko the little robot ripped them out from their timeline of after Breath of the Wild, which would then lead them to return to a whole new timeline where the champions were alive the whole time, since the timeline changed and the champions survived in the end. In short, Sidon's return to the future world would have him surprised to see his sister alive, and Sidon and Mipha would live together side by side in a new timeline with Sidon's surprise, like, whoa, what the heck, Mipha's alive? But that didn't happen in Tears of the Kingdom, because if you played Tears of the Kingdom, this argument is clearly incorrect. The successors, now known as the Sages, would still exist in this original Breath of the Wild timeline, and clearly do not recall events of traveling back in time to save the champions in the past. So, did it happen or not? Well, some of you might say, dude, it's clearly not canon, man, it's a spin-off, it's not canon, Hyrule Warriors is not canon, blah 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 blah. Hey, it can still be canon. Why? Aonuma said the Zelda team was heavily involved with the production of Age of Calamity, and that includes the story. But now with Tears of the Kingdom, how could it make sense? I'll get into that. In my original theory video, I used a triple timeline theory due to Teriko going back in time and the successors being ripped out of their timeline to save the champions. While this specific timeline proposal is clearly wrong, I believe an adjustment can make it a strong theory once again. Now that my previous theory has been recapped, my new theory adjustment still has a triple timeline split and goes as follows. Get ready for this one, guys. The original Breath of the Wild timeline that leads into Tears of the Kingdom and Tears of the Kingdom's time travel shenanigans will now be known as the Untouched timeline, where nothing in Age of Calamity is taken out from that timeline except Teriko's initial jump back in time because of Zelda awakening her power in Breath of the Wild. That scene is the opening cutscene for Age of Calamity, which is canon to Breath of the Wild. Zelda's awakening is the only Breath of the Wild event that connects outside of its timeline, which is the first and main Untouched timeline. So now we have Timeline 1, the Untouched timeline, which contains Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Now, Timelines 2 and 3 consist solely in Age of Calamity's continuity. Timeline 3 is an offshoot of Timeline 2, being the end of Age of Calamity. Timeline 2 is simply the events of Age of Calamity until a certain point, being the timeline manipulation that takes place in Chapter 5 of the game. Teriko, the little robot having a mysterious power that is able to rip through timelines, autonomously created Timelines 2 and 3. And so, understand all three of these timelines are actually present in Age of Calamity. Timeline 1 is simple to understand. Teriko awakened in Breath of the Wild's Memory 17 and went back in time to alter events. After he leaves, that timeline continues on with the events of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. What isn't so simple to understand, however, is Timelines 2 and 3. Timeline 2 begins the second Teriko arrives in the past, altering the events of what happened 100 years before Breath of the Wild. Now, the conundrum behind Timeline 3 comes from Teriko's ability to manipulate the predestination of Timeline 2's future. As we know, even with Teriko in the past, the Calamity still awakens and takes over the Sheikah technology. Without another form of time manipulation, the champions' lives will be lost again, and the Sheikah technology, which includes the Divine Beast, cannot be redeemed and will work against Link, Zelda, and Hyrule's remaining forces. Isn't that interesting? It's as if there's some sort of inevitable predestiny for Calamity Ganon to take over the Sheikah technology. That statement could be its own video, but anyway, Terrako and the information he provides seems like it's not enough to stop the grand power of the Calamity. That is, until Terrako utilizes a time power way ahead of what anyone could have thought. By Zelda's tear landing on the robot's eye, the robot gains a power that looks in that timeline's future and brings the successors, or should I say the sages, back from Breath of the Wild, supposedly. Terrako's power went into the predestined outcome of this timeline, Timeline 2, which mirrors Timeline 1's future, being the champion's dead and Link's defeat. And using this predestined foresight, Terrako then turns predestination into a presumption by altering events once again to make another difference in the war against the Calamity. The sages travel from Timeline 2's bad future that parallels Breath of the Wild to change the past and create a new timeline to win the war. Thus, Timeline 3 is exactly the same as Timeline 2, except the sages travel from the future to save their predecessors. Here's a visual representation. I believe this presentation in Age of Calamity makes more sense and can be defined as a triple timeline split. While we can put a bow on this discussion, Tears of the Kingdom opens a can of worms in response to this theory. The Light Dragon, Ganondorf, the looping timeline, and Zelda's Tears. Are Age of Calamity's chances of actually being canon renewed or given another chance because of the events of Tears of the Kingdom? This conversation opens floodgates and will have to be continued in a part 2, especially considering Zelda's mother and her connection with Sheikah technology, which I made a whole series of videos on theories about Zelda's mother. I'm probably going to have to make another one too to add to that collection. Link to all of them in the description, and I'll put the recent one up here. Tears of the Kingdom, Sheikah technology, Light Dragon, time travel, my oh my, and let's not forget about this possibility.